Have you ever watched a child ask a simple question that changed someone's life forever? Imagine sitting in a small restaurant after a long day, trying to enjoy a quiet meal with your father. Then you notice an elderly woman sitting alone in the corner, staring at an empty plate because she cannot afford dinner. Most people look away. Most people pretend not to notice. But one little boy couldn't. What happened next left everyone in that restaurant speechless. One act of kindness from a single dad and his son reminded everyone that being rich isn't about money, it's about having a heart that refuses to ignore someone in need. Before we begin, welcome to Heartline Stories, where every story reminds us that kindness can change lives. If you enjoy heartfelt stories that inspire hope, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's begin today's unforgettable story. It was a rainy Thursday evening in Chicago. The streets shimmered beneath the streetlights as people hurried home after work. Daniel Carter, a 38-year-old single father, parked his old pickup truck outside a small family restaurant. He looked exhausted after working a 12-hour shift as an electrician, but the smile on his face returned the moment he looked at his 8-year-old son, Ethan. "You promised burgers tonight," Ethan said with a grin. Daniel laughed. "And I always keep my promises." Inside the restaurant, the smell of fresh bread and grilled burgers filled the air. Families laughed together while soft music played in the background. Daniel and Ethan found a booth near the window and ordered 2 cheeseburgers and fries. As they waited, Ethan quietly looked across the room. "Dad," he whispered. Daniel looked up from the menu. "What is it, buddy?" Ethan pointed toward an elderly woman sitting alone in the corner. She wore an old gray coat that was too thin for the weather. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a cup of water. There was no food on her table. The waitress approached the woman. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said gently. "If you're not ordering anything, I need the table." The woman nodded with embarrassment. "I understand," she replied softly. "I was only trying to warm up for a few minutes." Daniel watched silently. He knew that look. Years earlier, after his wife passed away, there had been nights when he barely had enough money to feed Ethan. He remembered the shame of counting every dollar before buying groceries. Then Ethan asked the question. "Dad, can she eat with us?" Daniel looked into his son's innocent eyes. There was no pity there. Only kindness. Without saying another word, Daniel stood up. He walked across the restaurant and smiled at the elderly woman. "Ma'am," he said kindly, "my son and I would be honored if you'd join us for dinner." The woman looked shocked. "Oh no," she replied quickly. "I couldn't possibly." Ethan walked over with a bright smile. "Please," he said. "My dad says food tastes better when you share it." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "My name is Margaret," she whispered. "I'm Ethan." "And I'm Daniel." Margaret slowly joined them. The waitress returned, expecting another uncomfortable conversation. Instead, Daniel ordered another full meal. "And please bring her your best slice of apple pie," he added. The waitress smiled warmly. "Right away." As they ate, Margaret began telling her story. She had once been an elementary school teacher for more than 40 years. Thousands of children had passed through her classroom. She loved every one of them. But after retiring, life became difficult. Her husband passed away. Medical bills consumed her savings. Her only daughter had moved overseas years ago, and they had slowly lost contact. "I never imagined growing old would feel so lonely," Margaret admitted. Daniel listened quietly. Ethan reached across the table and held her hand. "My teacher says everyone deserves a friend." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Your teacher is very wise." For the first time in months, she laughed. Other customers began watching. One businessman quietly asked the waitress to pay for another family's meal. A young couple left an extra tip for the staff. Without anyone announcing it, kindness began spreading across the restaurant. The manager noticed everything. When Daniel asked for the check, the manager walked over. "It's already taken care of." Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean?" The manager smiled. "A customer who didn't want to be identified paid for your dinner. He said your kindness reminded him of his late father." Daniel looked around, but no one admitted it. Margaret wiped another tear from her cheek. "You gave me hope tonight," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No. My son did." After dinner, Daniel offered to drive Margaret home. Her apartment building was old but clean. Before leaving, Ethan pulled something from his pocket. It was a small blue friendship bracelet he had made at school. "My teacher says friends give friends presents," Ethan explained. "I want you to have this." Margaret hugged him tightly. "I'll treasure it forever." The next morning, Daniel received an unexpected phone call while working. "Mr. Carter?" the voice asked. "Yes. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm Margaret's daughter." Daniel stopped working. "She told me everything that happened last night." Sarah explained that she had lived in Seattle for years. After hearing her mother's emotional story, she realized how much time had slipped away. "I booked the first flight this morning," she said. "I'm with her now." Daniel smiled. "I'm glad." "There's something else," Sarah continued. "Mom said your kindness saved her from giving up." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "You don't owe us anything." "I know," Sarah replied. "But I'd like to repay your kindness." Weeks passed. Daniel thought little about the phone call until one Saturday afternoon when there was a knock at his door. Standing outside were Margaret and Sarah. Margaret looked healthier and happier than before. Sarah handed Daniel a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, "You reminded my mother that the world still has good people. You reminded me that family should never wait for tomorrow. Thank you for giving us a second chance." Daniel folded the letter carefully. It was only dinner. Margaret smiled. "No, Daniel. It was dignity." Months later, Ethan's school held an assembly celebrating kindness in the community. The principal invited Daniel and Ethan to the stage. Margaret sat proudly in the front row beside Sarah. The principal smiled at the audience. One simple question changed several lives. She looked at Ethan. "Dad, can she eat with us?" The auditorium became completely silent. Parents wiped away tears. Children smiled at one another. Daniel looked at his son with pride. Sometimes the greatest lessons don't come from adults. Sometimes they come from children who haven't yet learned to ignore people who are hurting. As they walked home that evening, Ethan slipped his small hand into his father's. "Dad?" "Yes?" "If we see someone hungry again." Daniel smiled before Ethan even finished. "We'll always make room at our table." Because kindness doesn't begin when you have extra money. It begins the moment you decide another person matters. And perhaps the greatest gift we can ever give someone isn't a meal, a gift, or even money. It's reminding them they are seen, valued, and never alone. If this story touched your heart, remember that even the smallest act of kindness can become someone else's reason to keep believing in people. Be the person who notices. Be the person who cares. And whenever you can, leave one more seat at your table, because you never know whose life might change with a simple invitation.